Welcome, everyone. We're giving like 1 minute more for everyone to settle down. Welcome to the webinar of Status of South European Fathers Report, Findings, Implications, and Way Forward. I would like to slowly start and welcome. My name is Aisha Alayla. I'm from the International Step by Step Association, and I'm very honored to be here today with our very valuable guests who will make this discussion very rich, and together we'll go over the findings of the survey that we conducted in Spain, Portugal, and Italy. We have our partners of EMINC initiative from Centro per la Salute del Bambino. I'm always having trouble reading. I'm so sorry. We have Giorgio Tambullini, who is the director and he's a pediatrician. We have Anina Lubok from CSP as well, and she was an independent consultant and tremendously supporting the agenda forward. And we have from Observatory of Masculinities and SESH as principal researchers Tatiana Mora, and she also has a lot of experience working with formerly Promundo and Equimundo. And we have Heinrich Geldschlager. I'm so sorry if I can say it right. He's a psychologist, psychotherapist, and a founding member of Connexus, which are all EMINC partners. And we have here some Equimundo colleagues. We have Nikki van der Haag. She's an independent gender consultant, senior fellow of Equimundo, and she's the author of the State of the World Fathers reports. And we have Tavishi Gupta as a senior researcher from Equimundo, and Kristina Vlahovikova, who is a fellow of Equimundo. And we have Martino Serapioni. He's a senior research program coordinator in the European Observatory on Family Policy in COFACE Families Europe. Thank you for being here and moving the agenda forward together with us. I don't want to lose more time, and I would like to go over today's agenda a little bit and the goals. We want to focus on firstly presenting the main findings of the reports and give some insights from the countries. And we would like to highlight the areas of focus that need attention, that kind of urges us to speak and really look at with a better light. And together we want to discuss priorities, identify lessons learned, and really focus on what kind of actionable steps as a community we can take. And we will be happy to launch the State of Fathers, State of Southern European Fathers report. All of this was made real under EMINC initiative. We did the survey in collaboration with Equimundo and under EMINC project, which is Engaging Men in Nurturing Care. As you can see, we have, in a nutshell, we have our quests. We're wondering what hinders men engagement in shared caregiving. We are looking for ways to influence fathers' caregiving practices at home and also across services. What policies are supporting them, and what are the effective ways to influence, practices in professionals in daily practice? So we conduct this project in Italy, Portugal, and Spain, and we aim to build alliances and we aim to build this agenda together forward. So before we continue, I think we can warm up a little bit with a mini quiz about the findings, because this will kind of start our thinking and dive into more. So for each question, we will have 20 seconds to write down our answers. And let's see how well we can get aligned with those. So the first question is, what percentage of fathers believe they share caregiving equally with their partners? We can use the chat function, or if you have some ideas, you can also unmute yourself from our speakers if they don't know already. I see 74-51. Yeah, well, we got one answer right at 74%. 74% of fathers believe that they share caregiving equally with their partners, but very interesting is only 51% of mothers are in agreement with this. So this kind of underscores a gap in between the perceptions of the mothers and fathers. Okay, I will move on to the next question. What percentage of fathers agree that parental leave should be equal because mothers and fathers share the same rights and responsibilities in childcare and domestic work? Do we have any idea? We can use the chat function as well. So this can be a bit of a tricky question. We don't have answers. Okay, I will move on and surprise you that 66%. This shows a growing support for equal caregiving, but it also shows us that there's a push for more equitable policy designs, and we will discuss more in depth. So the next question would be, which of the following best reflects the percentage of mothers and fathers who report willingness to reduce their work commitments to care for children? So that might be also a bit tricky. Let me see the chat if we have answers. Answer B. I see you're right. So what we see here, 52% of mothers and 39% of fathers suggesting traditional, hinting towards traditional expectations towards this kind of decisions made in the family. So the next question would be, which formal support service was most commonly accessed by both fathers and mothers for parenting or care support? We might have ideas, and based on earlier findings as well, I'm wondering if this is the case. So I will move on. So we see education services, 76% of fathers and 75% of mothers, they report having made use of education services, making them the most commonly accessed form of formal support, but health services just follow behind as in the second place. So my next question is, among Southern European fathers dissatisfied with their caregiving capacity, what is the most frequently cited barrier to spending more time caring for their children? Lack of parenting skills, low motivation, time constraints, or limited access to childcare support. Oops. Sorry, I gave away the answer, but it's time constraints due to work. It shows that structural constraints are a major limitation for engaged fathers, and work-life balance is affected. So thank you for this fast-forward warm-up together with me. I would like to give a little bit of overview of the main findings before we dive into each country for specific findings and reflections. And let's dive into it deeper together. So we conducted the survey to explore fatherhood and caregiving in Southern Europe, in Italy, Portugal, and Spain. We used a purpose of sampling with an online panel. It has a good gender representation, and it's a proportional regional coverage. The survey tools developed by Equimundo and together with partners, they were adapted. They focused on caregiving involvement, attitudes, barriers, and access to services. We collected the data in September 14 and October 7, and you can see the overview of the sample here. You will have more detail in the report when you have a look at it. So if we start with care distribution, actually, we see the survey shows that, well, many fathers are actively involved in caregiving. There are still some gaps. As you can see, 91% of mothers and 86% of fathers engage in routine childcare. But when we think about with the younger children, there's a bigger gap. And the household tasks are like cooking and cleaning, where mothers take on significantly more responsibility. We see also differences. So mothers spend on average 12 hours in caregiving housework and compared to fathers. So we can see that they're bearing the more burden. If we go into a bit detail, to give you an example, when looked at separately, women also bear the emotional caregiving, for example, making children feel better, talking through their struggles, and also for household needs. For example, making grocery lists, preparing food, cleaning the house, washing clothes, cleaning the bathroom, these kind of things also fall more on women's shoulders. Now, I would like to talk a little bit about, in a nutshell, about the barriers for father involvement. As you can see, time, cultural, and financial insecurity are the main ones that were reported by them. They are struggling to balance caregiving and work obligations. Nearly 2/3 of fathers who report dissatisfaction with their caregiving capacity, they say time as a constraint for caring for their children. And the financial insecurity also follows, rightfully. 10% of them, they said they lack financial stability or security in engaging domestic work around the house, also caring for children. But most importantly, when we think about it, the cultural norms, we can still see some rigid masculinity norms lingering around. Around 1 in 4 men and women endorse at least one traditional view on caretaking, such as men should not be too quick to express care for others, boys should not be taught to sew, cook or clean, or they report being uncomfortable doing tasks like cleaning, changing diapers, doing dishes. If we dive more into the attitudes towards care, we see that men are more likely to endorse traditional gender roles compared to women. And we see an age effect, which is an interesting finding that might be, discussed also in parallel with the earlier reports and other findings, that younger individuals show weaker adherence to traditional masculine norms, and each year of age there's a decline, and economic hardship pops up again. So this financial strains increases the likelihood of supporting traditional roles in masculine terms. Sorry for the phone. That increases the likelihood of traditional roles and masculinity norms when financial strain increases. All in all, how about accessing care support? What mothers and fathers reports? We see that again, cost is the #1 issue. Many of the fathers and mothers paid childcare is too expensive, and quality concerns also persist along with the financial issues. 67 of fathers and 63 of mothers are reporting that they're dissatisfied with the standard of paid care available. As we had a look in the quiz, we see that education and health services are the most accessed ones. But of course, there were also social services and in a very little number, private and NGO-led programs were reported. Here, we see very close with mothers and fathers what they report. So there's kind of overlap in that sense. When mothers and fathers report and work-life balance policies such as reduced working hours, remote work, and these flexible schedules, these are widely available, but the access and the use differs for mothers and fathers, as you can see here. Women report greater access to work-life balance measures than men, and men use significantly less even when available. And we can see different gaps in different countries, which we can go maybe into deep when we're talking about the work-life balance issues. So when asked about barriers to to leave uptake. Many of the things were listed. You can see more in depth in the report. For example, mothers and fathers talk about they have a sense of responsibility, there are economic constraints that they cannot do it, they have concerns for their careers in line with the workplace culture and their fear of being judged. But the most, how to say, the salient, most popping up issue is that the household roles, because 54 fathers say that they took less leave because their partner was already managing the care. So we see also a difference in these numbers, which is, thought-provoking for later steps. But we also see good results. I think there's a movement, there's a direction that we're going. There's an agreement between parents that about the benefits of shared caregiving on children's development. So there's a high agreement, and they are actually perceiving the benefits of parental leave for the whole family. But still, there some traditional views exist and lurking around. For example, a minority of the parents believe that the caregiving has historically been women's job, so to speak, where it's an area where women have power. So these, although little, there's still some traditional views existing. So I don't want to dive more into way forward, but we need policy reforms to strengthen, structural supports. We need workplace transformation, making caregiving compatible with work. We need to change and shift the norms around fatherhood altogether to achieve a systemic change as well. And we know that fathers and parents need community level engagement to establish peer support and support networks. So I will stop now before giving floor to our MENG partners to go over their country context. And I would like to thank to all of the MENG partners. I would like to thank Equimundo and also Early Childhood Regional Networks Fund for making it possible to reach this point. So I would like to invite, not to lose any time, Tatiana Moura to present some insights from Portugal. Please, Tatiana. I will be helping you with the slide.
Thank you so much, ISSA, for in a nutshell, trying to resume our report. A huge thank you to Tavishi and to Cristina and to Equimundo for making this possible with high quality. And I mean, we've been part of the State of the World's Fathers, and it's interesting to see what changed and what did not change. So, of course, Portugal is not an exception from the still traditional views, but let's share some data and reflect about it. Next slide, please. Aisha, I need you to change. Okay. So, where do fathers stand in caregiving in Portugal? In what concerns paternity leave, we have 20 mandatory days plus 8 optional days, 100% paid. So we're far from an ideal paternity leave. But there's a new law from 2 years ago, from 2023, giving 90 more days at 20% pay if combined with part-time work. This is a very low pay. So the actual use is 63% of fathers that take compulsory leave, but only 14% of them extend the leave versus 17% of the mothers. The partial work disconnection is also an issue, and in Portugal, 25% of fathers remain partially connected to work during leave. We know how difficult this is and what a barrier this is. Next slide, please. So some key barriers to paternal involvement in the case of Portugal, but also in other countries. First of all, lack of time. Due to work obligations, 65% of fathers and mothers revealed dissatisfaction with the time for caregiving. Also, and again, traditional gender norms or roles. Fathers are 3.6 times more likely than mothers to not use their leave. because their partner was already assuming their role as caregivers. Aisha already mentioned this. And social attitudes. 12% of fathers in Portugal face social opposition, or they say they face social opposition to leave uptake, and 80% feel indifferent about that. Next, please. Also, financial constraints. 51% of mothers and fathers say leave pay is insufficient. Family income hinders them from leaving work to provide care. Also, low work flexibility. Only 43% of men have access to work flexibility policies. So the uptake of these policies is lower among men, 24% versus 39% of women. And finally, career impact fears. 38% of fathers, they say that they fear a negative impact on progression in career for taking the leave. Next, please. So if we look at the support services to access and limitations, we see that only 39% of fathers and 46% of mothers were satisfied with the formal support services available. Also, they pointed out the high costs and lack of availability. 49% of men and 45% of women still consider childcare facilities too expensive and local provisions insufficient. Also, there is an information gap. 68% of men and 71% of women are unaware of available support services. And finally, we have low participation in training programs on caregiving. Only 45% of men and 36% of women have participated in this kind of programs. Next, please. Regarding caregiving roles and rethinking culture and society expectations, we see that there are persistent norms. 80% of men and 69% of women feel that they have to manage caregiving alone without resorting to external support. This perpetuates the burden on mothers and limits men's ability to share care. There's also care overload, leading to stress, to fatigue, to insomnia, 62% of fathers and 80% of mothers. Also, a desire for change. 68% of fathers support advocacy actions to demand better parental leave and childcare policies. And this is one of the highest levels among the countries analyzed and follows some conclusions from the last State of the World's Fathers. Next, please. And finally, some summary and recommendations. So we need a strong legal foundation for paternity leave. We still face challenges like work-life imbalance, meaning lack of time, scarce flexibility at work, obstacles to career progression. We also have economic insufficiency to cover leave time. And there's a perpetuation of social and cultural norms, traditional norms that assign caregiving mainly to women. We have lack of and high cost of support services, and we need a call for action. We need to call for the improvement of paying and flexibility of leave, enhance access to affordable and high quality caregiving services, and promote a cultural shift towards shared caregiving. I just want to finish my quick presentation. This is like Portugal in a nutshell, by saying that the government's changed in the meantime. And so we need also to pay attention, because all of these asks and call for actions and challenges, I think they will increase in the next 4 years, at least in Portugal, with the right-wing and extreme right-wing, fascist right-wing in power. So we need to pay even more attention to the laws they want to pass. Thank you so much, Aisha.
Thank you so much for this overview. I know it's in a nutshell, but hopefully we will have more time to dive a bit more and elaborate if needed in the discussion part. And I would like to now invite Heinrich from Conexus Spain to go over the Spanish context. Thank you. Floor is yours, Heinrich.
Thank you so much, ISSA, for making all this possible, this launch event. And also I want to echo the thanks to Equimundo, Tavishi, and Christina for the brilliant support in running the survey and writing up the report. Many of the results have been very similar in the three countries, so I would like to focus on some of the specific results for Spain, some of the differences in the responses from the Spanish sample. And to understand them, it is important to understand an issue around our context in Spain, which is the paid parental leave system. In comparison to the other two countries, it is clearly the most advanced one since 2021. Leave is equal, 16 weeks for each parent, non-transferable and fully paid at 100% of the previous earnings. And the first 6 weeks have to be taken simultaneously, while the resting 10 weeks have to be negotiated with the employer. They can be split, taken part-time, so there's different options within the first year after birth or adoption. And the latest numbers that we have on leave uptake from the official statistics of the Spanish Social Security is that 99% of mothers who are entitled to the leave take all the 16 weeks, and just over 90% of the entitled fathers do so. And this is important to understand some of the slight differences between the Spanish respondents and the other two countries in the attitudes towards leave, which are pretty much aligned with this progressive policy and legislation. So we have found the highest support for the equal leave in the Spanish parents, but also for an equal leave with fathers taking it later than mothers. And we'll get back to that issue later on in the second panel discussion. Also, the highest proportion of parents stating that leave is sufficient, 38%, while still 42% of fathers and 60% of mothers consider the 16 weeks too short. Can we have the next slide, please? I said thank you. The differential barriers to involvement in care, we found the biggest gap in what parents said about the lack of support from their partners. Spanish women agreed with this item twice as much as men regarding domestic work and regarding childcare. So women say the lack of support from the partners is an important barrier to their involvement in care. And the difference between men and women is bigger than in the other two countries. And also with regard to the negative impact on their careers that Tatiana also mentioned, we found the highest gap between genders in Spain. Women fear that, interestingly, more than men. 39% of women and 29% of men fear a negative impact if involved more in care. But still, more than half of mothers and almost half of fathers would consider working part-time to take care of their child, in line with what Aisha explained to us. Although the reality then in really working part-time to take care is quite different, as we also know. Okay. With regard to care supports, on the one hand, there's some apparent contradictions. Spanish parents have the highest perception of availability of any support, both formal and informal for care. So men say 65% of men and 54% of women say that they have support for care available. But at the same time, they are least satisfied with the formal or paid care services. In line with what Tatiana explained about Portugal, they consider them too expensive. They have concerns about the quality, and they find that these paid care services are insufficiently available and don't cover enough hours for their needs, and especially that there's insufficient public or subsidized childcare services. So that is clearly a need here and a recommendation to promote change. And on the other hand, the satisfaction with the public services, health, education, and social services was higher than the other countries. So 2/3 were happy with the quality of the health services provided, 60% with education, and 50% even with the social services. With regard to the work-life balance measures in the companies, they are more available to the Spanish parents, especially with regard to part-time work and enjoying a continuous working day. So 83% of women and 73% of men in Spain said that they had these measures available to them. But also we have the biggest gap between genders in use. So about half of women and just under 1/3 of men really use these measures that are available to them in the companies. And with regard to the reasons for not using the available measures, the perceived responsibility to keep working showed the biggest gap in the three countries between men and women. 1 out of 4 men and 1 out of 10 women said that this perceived responsibility constrained them for using these measures. So to sum up some of the conclusions and ways forward based on the findings for Spain, we'll come back to that later. We need still, despite the advanced leave policy, they need some adjustments also to comply with the EU directive. We need a significant increase of public or subsidized care support services, especially of kindergarten places, public kindergarten places. Work-life balance measures in companies could be improved, but especially we need a change in organizational cultures to promote their use by men specifically, so father-friendly cultures in the companies. And of course, as in all three countries, we need to generate change towards a culture of shared care and transform traditional gender norms. So thank you, and looking forward to hearing about Italy.
Thank you so much, Tatiana. Thank you so much, Heinrich, for giving us a really snapshot of the country. I think these are helpful. And now I would like to move on to context of Italy. Anina is here and Giorgio is here. Please, Anina, the floor is yours.
Yes,
And Giorgio,
I'm
please
not
feel free
seeing
to add.
myself. I'm not seeing myself actually, but that doesn't really matter. I'm still seeing Tatiana on my screen.
Yeah. Maybe you can kind of make it smaller and bigger again? Maybe people should, because I can see you. I can see you.
You can see me.
If your camera is a bit down, it would be easier for us to see you.
Like this, but I can't.
Yes.
I still can't see myself, but that doesn't matter. Wait a minute. Okay, I see myself in the corner.
You found it?
No, I'm
Yes.
in the corner somewhere, but that's okay. I have decided not to use PowerPoint and not to give figures because many figures have been already provided, and I think I want to focus on the differences. This has been a wonderful and exciting and useful process, and thanks to everybody. I'd like to acknowledge Maddalena Canito, who today she had exams at the university, but she was a major contributor to all of this. Now, there are many commonalities between our three countries where the majority of parents recognize the benefits of fathers' engagement for children, where the majority say they would like to have more time to spend with caring for their children, but they don't have enough time due to work-life balance issues, due to inadequate policies, to inadequate services, and so on. Now, beyond many commonalities, in some cases the average is just about the same, Italy, the scenario from Italy is really more negative. And this is really, it's not surprising for us. And we're definitely going to use this as a lever when we do our advocacy work. Shaming is not a bad idea sometimes. One major problem we have in the background, which is the structural problem, is that we have the highest women's unemployment rate in Europe, or the lowest women's employment rate in Italy, with the regions in the south which are dragging down the average because they have statistics that are under 40%. And of course, if you've got such a large proportion of women who are only housewives, the whole issue of sharing the care is just off the table. We have very poor leave. Well, I'll get back to that. But I found it very interesting. There was a figure saying that actually, in deciding who to vote for, the fact of voting for a party that is fighting for longer leave is an important consideration, and we're definitely going to use this for our advocacy. There's generally a pretty unfavorable work culture in Italy, though. Remember that we have a large number of medium and small enterprises, and everything is more difficult there. But this culture is changing. And then we have an overall cultural issue. Leave, you know well that Italy has only 10 days, which is, I think, by now the lowest number of days of adequately paid leave for fathers. The uptake of those miserable 10 days is about 65%. But the thing is that we don't know how many days were actually taken. And there are enormous differences between North, Center, and South Italy, with percentages that are like nearly 90% in Northeast Italy and like under 17% in some provinces in the South. And also, I mean, it's incredible because Spain has 90%, but that's 90% of 16 weeks, not of 10 days. Work, interestingly, in Italy, fathers and mothers in Italy find it more difficult than their Spanish and Portuguese counterparts to balance work and family. It's mainly the women that are struggling with this. They're the ones who tend to take work-life balance opportunities. The men, of course, say they fear consequences for their career. But interestingly, where research has been done on the impact of paternity leave, taking paternity leave, for example, provided by the company, really there have been no consequences for men. So we think there's a lot of awareness building to be done to dispel this fear. Support from services is interesting and a little bit encouraging for Italy, because here the responses from mothers and fathers are a little more positive in relation to support received from health services and education services than in Spain and Portugal. Nevertheless, there's a wide proportion of mothers and fathers who complain that there isn't enough support. And again, it's the women who perceive this lack of support more than the men. But another point I think that it's striking for Italy, but exists in other countries as well, is this idea that taking care of very small children therefore the first 1,000 days, let's say, is a primary responsibility of families, which means, of course, we know, mainly women. And this is both a cause and a reflection of a welfare system in Italy that is very, let's say, familistic, based on this idea that it's family's responsibility. Then in terms, if we look at about sharing the care and who does what, I mean, definitely men are doing more. There's definitely doing more, but the women are still bearing the biggest load regarding the routine work, which is much less pleasant. And the perception gap between women and men on the amount of amount of support that they're providing is higher in Italy than in the other two countries. Also, in Italy, we have a higher proportion of traditionalism, let's say, regarding caring and parenting roles. Interestingly, we've also got 20% and the same percentage for women and men saying that women gatekeep. So that's 20%, and that's not a small percentage either. The traditional values, meaning those who believe that men have the last word, that they shouldn't be doing cleaning or changing diapers, and that women are biologically more predisposed to care. So that sort of cultural element is there. All of this is going to be tremendously useful for us in our advocacy. We actually, in 10 days' time, we have a press conference where we're going to present the results. We'll definitely, I mean, there's a general advocacy issue which is beyond the scope of just our work, which is this whole issue of women's employment. Unless women's employment increases significantly, decent employment, we're not going to go very far, because it's demonstrated that couples where both work share care more equally. No surprise there. And services. We're still pretty below target. We'll talk about that, I think, during the discussion. We'll continue to advocate. We've been doing this for the last years. We're continuing on extending leave, but as in the case of Portugal, we're also contending with a right-wing government which is opposed to the principle of compulsory paternity leave and of non-transferable leave. So big obstacles there. And we will continue to work with companies on work-life balance, where we've seen that it's very effective to focus on the benefits of all this, not just in terms of gender equality, but actually of the children. This is something that works with managers as well. So that's about it. And thanks again for the whole thing.
Anina,
Yes.
thank you so much. Thank you so much for this overview. I mean, looking at the three countries, we can say there are huge overlaps, but we can also say very country-specific approaches that can guide our advocacy agenda forward. Yes, we will discuss more in the discussion session, but first I would like to give floor to Nikki. She kindly accepted to be here. She's the author of earlier SOF reports as well. Nikki, how do you reflect to these findings? How does it build up of the work so far it has been done? Where do you see overlaps and distinctions? How would you guide us?
Thank you, and thanks for inviting me. And I have to say, I'm one of many authors, including Tavishi, of these.
True.
So yeah, really, really interesting to look at the similarities and the differences, and also the contrast between your countries. I think national and regional contexts are so important for policy change. And as Anina pointed out, comparisons like this can also be used to drive change. So I think your regional grouping is really interesting. So just for those who don't know about it, State of the World's Fathers is a biannual report, first one in 2015. So we're now on, and we're now working on the 6th. And the 2023 report was an online survey of 12,000 people in 17 countries. So it's very interesting to start comparing your regional report with the kind of more general one. And I think I've got 7 very quick points, and then just a couple of overarching points. I mean, a number of you have mentioned the right-wing governments, and I think, the context in which we're operating here are both positive in terms of increases in parental and paternity leave in many, many countries since 2015, and cultural change too, you've pointed that out, but there is a backlash. And there's a long way to go. And interestingly, the International Men and Gender Equality Survey that Ecomundo also undertakes just shows that young men are not always more progressive than their fathers. So in your surveys, young men were more progressive, and I was interested in your sliding scale, but that's not always true. We are moving backwards in some places, which makes this work even more important. So just very quickly, so many things I could have picked up. I think the first one was around the importance of structural and systemic change as well as individual and cultural change. So policies like parental leave have to go hand in hand with social and gender norm change, what you call cultural change. And I like your call for change at community levels too. We also found that, you know, obviously the community around you, whether that's at your home or your workplace, is really, really important in supporting care and supporting fathers doing more care. Probably don't need to say much about this, but yes, we also found mothers still doing more than fathers. And I'm quite interested in the nuances of this, because you found, I think, that the biggest disparity was in tasks like cooking and cleaning and emotional and household care load. We found the same thing in the last State of the World's Fathers report. And when you got down to things like emotional care for care for elders or care for people with disabilities, mothers were still doing more, but not quite as much more. I want to mention, and I know Angela's here, a 7-country European survey by Make Mothers Matter, which found the same thing, mothers were doing more than fathers, and managing particularly more of what they call tangible tasks, so cooking and cleaning, as well as the intangible, like planning and organizing, what's often called the mental load. And that was, interestingly, whether these mothers were working outside the home or not. So even if mothers are working just as much outside the home as fathers, that still holds true. And I think, Angela, you can come back later, but I think Make Mothers Matter had similar findings to you on stress. And this was a mother's survey, but on mothers' stress and the struggles of bringing up children and just how difficult it is. I certainly think I've got 2 grandchildren now, and I see my daughter and son-in-law really struggling with things that I didn't have to struggle with. I think it's got more difficult in lots of ways, not easier. The other point, couple of points, men's and women's views on how much care they do. You found as well as we did that men think they do more than women think they do. I think it's also stresses for me why it's so important to have surveys with men and women to make that contrast. Because there really is a gap there between, and that may be a gap between men's perceptions of what they do and their actual practice. I mean, men are saying that they care, and certainly in State of the World's Fathers and I think in your reports, but there is a difference in perception. Childcare costs you picked up, we certainly had that as well. And the fact that childcare costs are outpacing income growth in many countries means that women are more likely to drop out of the workforce, and we end up in, I mean, I think in Italy they've never gone into it, have they, Anina? But, you know, when women are not in the workforce, it's really problematic. And the other thing I think we found in the State of World's Fathers, the latest one, was that generally people felt that caring for children was positive, joyful, wonderful, but mothers and fathers who said they had little or no support were more likely to say that they found caring for children more exhausting than enjoyable. And I think that's quite interesting too. The support piece that you've pointed out is really, really important. I was wondering what else to say about parental leave. Yeah, I think again, consistent with what you're saying. I mean, the length of parental leave and paternity leave is so hugely variable. I think there was a study by the World Policy Analysis Centre. Only 24% of countries with shared parental leave guarantee at least 80% of wages. And I think anybody working on fatherhood is clear that the piece for fathers has to be as near as fully paid as is possible. It has to be at least 6 weeks. It has to be just for dads. So there are a number of things that we know from the research so far. And I think it's important not to forget the many millions out there who don't have employers. So we campaign for this leave, but actually, if you're in the gig economy or even self-employed, you don't get it. I think only 30 countries offer paternity leave to self-employed men, and only 4 in 100 self-employed men live in these countries. So hugely long way to go in terms of how we're thinking about that. Yeah, just 2 very tiny points because I know I've got 5 minutes. A willingness to reduce paid work for care. I thought that was interesting. Certainly we found the same thing in the latest State of the World's Fathers report. Again, more mothers prepared to do this than fathers, but percentages in each of our 17 countries for fathers was also above 50% in all except Croatia, Mexico, and China for some reason. There was a survey in the UK last week, which I found really interesting in this context, about whether people would be prepared to go back to full-time office working rather than working from home. And they asked dads in early 2022 about this, and 38% of fathers said they'd quit or look for a new job if they had to do that. But the survey that's just come out, which was the end of 2024, had gone up from 38 to 53%. So I think that's really interesting that fathers are really, they've got used to this, being able to work a bit from home, and that gives them the flexibility to be with their children more, and that's what they want. Okay, I'm just going to finish off with you talked a lot about the recommendations I thought were great and very much compatible with ours. I think one of the things maybe I would stress a bit more was it's not just teaching children about shared caregiving, it's really how do you teach boys about what it means to be a boy, what it means to be a man, and how that includes care. I think that's really, really important. And I know Ikemundo's started this Global Boyhood campaign, which is absolutely about doing that. Yeah, and I think you talked about mainstream media and campaigning. We can talk about that in the discussion. I think the kind of final overarching point for me is that we really did find that care leads to care. If you encourage an ethic of care among men and boys, and boys see their dads caring, it's good for the dads, it's good for the families, it's good for society. And I'm constantly hearing the word care used as a burden. But if we're to value care, we have to recognize that it's not, that, okay, there's some stuff that's really boring, but actually it's joyful, it's important, and the world couldn't function without it. And not only that, but mothers and fathers want to care. And as Anina said in your survey, and in ours as well, many are prepared to vote for that. And I think that's a lever that we can use for change. So recognizing and valuing care in our societies and economies is a still untapped way forward in helping to do all sorts of things like breaking cycles of violence, inequality, and this backlash that we've been talking about in many, many countries. So yeah, whistle stop tour, but really, really appreciative of this report and its contribution to the bigger debates. So thank you.
Nikki, thank you so much. We have such a little time, but you provided a really good overall picture, and you gave us like food for thought. Is the right expression? So there are many things to unpack, many things to take on, and thank you for this overview. I was seeing before moving on to some discussion questions. Now we can slowly move on to the panel discussion. We had already some topics that we wanted to focus on, but I see Tavishi and Christina was like, do you want to add something to when we're here before moving into, or if there's anything you want to add or reflect? Yes, Christina, yes.
I would absolutely. Thank you so much for the opportunity to discuss this very important topic and this very important report. And these are my children in the background. If you can hear them, apologies for that.
No worries.
Yes, I am very grateful to Nikki for this great overview, and I wanted to speak a little bit to that nuance that she was alluding to with the care measurement that we did in this survey, because I think it's quite revealing in answering why this perception of men contributing and women not agreeing with the ways that they're or the amount or the sort of showing up that they're doing is something that's still really important, and it's important to back that up with like actual real behavioral data. And I think to answer it honestly, like what is happening still with this gap, because we do know that progress has happened, we also know that inequality is still happening in very real ways. And the ways that we measured it is that we're still finding that women are doing 2 to 3 times the amount of housework. And especially when it comes to, and this was an interesting type of analysis that we did, that women are doing the high intensity caregiving. So that means 4 hours a day or more of any caregiving task, which is a threshold that has been associated with more negative health outcomes and well-being outcomes. And that is also what we find in our survey when we ask about those specific things. Women are suffering more from anxiety and depression. Women are suffering more from exhaustion and burdensome and burdensome symptoms that they're having to deal with. And another way that we looked at care as well was to look at really the amount of time that they're dedicating more than fathers are to, for example, housework. And we still find that there's 25 more minutes a day, which doesn't sound like much maybe, but those 25 minutes a day could be used for self-care. They could be used for basic things like rest, exercise, just basic things like get a snack, you know. And we're also finding in another section of our survey that women are in fact not self-caring in the same proportions as men are. And in fact, over 50% of women are not self-caring at all. So actually, it is, I think, a very important thing to reveal just the magnitude and continue to hammer in. We're not there yet. And while yes, there's progress, and we must celebrate that, because men need to feel empowered and recognized, because no one feels motivated if they're not empowered and recognized. This is something that we need to continue to do. And if I can just add one more thing that I think is like a really interesting finding from the report, is that we asked a question about raising sort of the raising children and who they prefer for their care, right? So who the parents perceive the children to have a preference for, right? And interestingly here too, we find this gap that 3 out of 4 fathers say that their children seek both of the parents equally for care, but only half of the mothers agree. And if we look at like the primary parents, we see that 45% of women say that they're preferred for the emotional support and 50% for the physical care, but only 13% of men say that they are the primary one for that. So I think until children turn to mothers and fathers equally for emotional and physical care, and there's recognition of this form for all caregivers, I think that's when we reach true equality. Right?
Thank you, Kristen. Yeah, I agree. I was also very, how to say, taken aback from this finding. Indeed, how can it be so much difference between this perception is something to definitely to discuss. Tavishi, I would like to move on then maybe towards discussion questions and get your points there, or if you want to add something at this moment.
I think my points will absolutely answer your questions too, but I think Nikki and Christina have certainly sparked some additional thoughts. I'm happy to wait.
Exactly. Yeah, okay. So just want to go over the topics we want to focus on today. We wanted to discuss really what strategies can work in shift in men's self-assessment, especially on this topic, accurate views of caregiving and caregiving balance. And we seen in 3 countries as well, there's some, the use of services and the satisfaction of services and the prevalence. And I would like to invite Martino also to reflect a little bit, because they were also working on some research about the availability and accessibility of services and along, correct me if I'm wrong, Martino, together with, they were researching the availability of leave. At last, we want to focus on policies and workplace culture. Alina and Giorgio in Italy, they've been doing a lot of concrete work around shifting the workplace policies and workplace culture, and how we can move forward as civil societies, and how we can move forward as EU. So by the time allows, it would be great if we can all together top on these topics. So I would like to start with maybe giving the floor to Emming Partners first. How can we bridge the perception, this gap between the mothers and fathers in shared caregiving? What kind of strategies could work in your context and in general? I would like to start with our Emming Partners. Maybe Tatiana, I can see the first you. Yes. Please go ahead. Yes.
Okay, so I tried to reflect a little bit about the questions you sent us, and the first one was, what strategies can work in shifting men's self-assessment towards a more accurate views of caregiving balance, correct? And so I was thinking that to shift, and we discussed here men's self-perception and promote a more accurate assessments of caregiving contributions, I think we can focus on three. In my case, I identified three particularly effective ones. First of all, evidence-based feedback mechanisms. So I think many fathers overestimate their caregiving roles, as we already mentioned too. Also to promote the use of caregiving time tracking tools, for example, time diaries, family tasks, audits. When we do our workshops, we do the pizza ones in parenting programs or workshops that can reveal actual contribution levels and prompt reflection. Also, narrative change through peer role models. So sharing stories of engaged fatherhood through men's networks, workplaces, the media. I agree with Danina. It's even more important now to work with corporations, with the private sector, with workplaces to change their internal culture. And this helps normalize men's deeper caregiving involvement and dismantle the idea that care is mainly helping the mother. Also, father inclusive education, looking at the data that we have in Portugal, prenatal and postnatal programs should explicitly address caregiving equality and engaging men early with sessions focused on emotional labor, mental load, and long-term child development creates this awareness and commitment to balance. Not sure if I answered your questions. I can go through the other ones if you don't mind, and then I think the other colleagues can also give their inputs if you don't mind. Regarding services and practices, so how can ISSA health and social services better include and support fathers without excluding mothers? This is very important. We see that fathers' underrepresentation in early childhood health and social services is often due to outdated assumptions that view mothers as the default caregivers. I keep giving the example of my son. So if he sees at home the mother and the father sharing the domestic chores and everything, and then goes to kindergarten and he only sees women, the message, he receives mixed messages regarding caregiving. So we need also to focus on caregiving as a job. So to create inclusive services that to support fathers without marginalizing mothers, I think we need to redesign outreach and communication. So at the moment, from our side, but also with EMINC, but with MenCare, we're developing campaigns with materials, registration forms, and messages that should address both parents equally. I thought it was really, really important when Christina said that until children turn to fathers and mothers on the same proportion, we will not have equality on care. So I think this is a brilliant idea for a campaign. And at the same time, services should move beyond the mother-centric language and include imagery and languages that welcomes fathers. We keep saying this for more than, I don't know, almost 20 years, and we keep trying to change environments in order to welcome fathers. Also, we need to train professionals in gender-sensitive engagements. We're like we're small organizations in order to change, globally what we need to change. So we need to equip health workers, educators, social service providers to engage fathers actively. I mean, since we created Program P and then Program Parent, we keep saying the same things. So we need to be very serious about what we've been identifying as a pattern. So asking about their caregiving role, the father's caregiving role, and encouraging them to participate in decisions and recognizing their contributions without tokenizing them. Offer flexible formats, we already mentioned, so fathers face very often structural barriers, so work schedules, etc., when they have an employment, a job, as Nikki mentioned, it's important, that prevent engagement. So evening or weekend appointments, online sessions, and father-focused support groups can increase accessibility. Also encouraging joint parenting participation in the sense that to promote policies and practices that invite both parents. For example, requiring both parents' names on ISSA records, or encouraging joint attendance in pediatric consultations, not only the father, not only the mother, but together. And finally, policy implementation. So how do we move from paper, as you asked, Aisha, to real-life implementation of EU frameworks or directives like work-life balance directive, the Barcelona targets? So the gap between legal entitlements and real-life uptake is especially wide in Southern Europe. We see this with our report. So I think to operationalize EU frameworks like work-life balance directive, we need to ensure adequate compensation. So rights must be financially viable. Because we can do that. Governments can do that. The state budget can do that. Low-paid parental leave discourages uptake, especially among men, we know. That full or near full wage replacement, particularly for paternity leave, is crucial. And normalize uptake through default structures. This means make certain leave segments non-transferable and mandatory for fathers. We have that in Spain, and we have partially in Portugal. This nudges behavior and shifts in cultural norms to normalize this uptaking the leave. Then strengthen enforcement and employer accountability. So implement monitoring systems that ensure compliance at workplace level. It's not only to make them be gender equal, to have some percentage of women and some percentage of men. We need also to make them accountable for the policies, for the internal policies they develop to support paternity and caring masculinities. And this includes audits, penalties for non-compliances, and incentives for family-friendly practices. We have some good examples in Portugal. I think we need to make them national. And finally, integrate care into economic planning. Of course, meeting the Barcelona targets requires funding, workforce expansion, and infrastructure. And governments must treat care as a public good, not just as a family issue. I say this lots of times, and those who know me, I come from violence studies and masculinity studies, and I keep saying that care is the opposite of violence. The opposite of violence is not non-violence, it's care, because care is proactive. Self-care, caring for the others, etc. So it is not just a family issue, it's also a way of building peace. Finally, support cultural change. So legal change must be matched by awareness-raising campaigns, education, and public discourses that reframe caregiving as a shared, valued role for all genders. Sorry if it took me too long, but I was like
No, it's the
Thank
time
you.
to discuss. You gave us a lot of insights. Thank you for going
Thank you.
over all of the points. I'm also opening this platform to reflect on each other. We can hear from Emming Partners, and then I would like to hear from Martino what he thinks about especially the second question. But before we move on, can we give the floor to Anina, Giorgio, and Heinrich to reflect a little bit further?
Giorgio, would you like to go first with the two questions, first two? Giorgio, we can't hear you.
I can't see Giorgio's camera. Giorgio, can you hear us?
And now?
Yes.
Now you can?
Yes, now you're back. Yes, now you're back.
Okay, so thank you, Aisha. Thank you, all of you. That's it's very stimulating discussion, I think, also for what we are doing in our countries and what we plan to do. I think we could contribute to this discussion by providing a few concrete examples about what we try to do in Italy. And I will take a sort of temporal line, starting with pregnancy and going on. For example, during pregnancy, I think it's very important to insist on participation of fathers in prenatal classes and devoting these prenatal classes to parenthood and fatherhood. So this baby is coming, what to do with the baby, what's changing in the couple, etc. And I think that's crucial to prepare. I think it's very important. That is being also shown by a study to involve fathers in the first ultrasound. Because that's a very powerful bonding experience. The same, of course, and even stronger is what happens at birth. And I think that some of these practices, like the full participation of fathers during childbirth and the skin-to-skin contact and all this, besides the evidence that we have about the enhancement of oxytocin production and all that you know, I'm sure you know, we have the fact, for example, that if you start measuring this, if you start asking maternity hospital to have this recorded, then you have an extra stimulation for managers, head nurses, head midwives, etc., and doctors, of course. So, for example, since last year, we have introduced in a national childbirth recording system the fact about whether the father or anyway the partner was participating in the childbirth. So this is recorded as much as the birth weight, you know, or the. So I think that helps, you know, because of course this is cultural work, but sometimes asking institutions to measure some practices is helpful. Then, for example, after childbirth, we have good work done with the pediatricians. Pediatricians telling us that the participation of father is much, much more than it used to be just a few years ago. And they can encourage this by recommending parents to participate both, to facilitating by choosing agreeing about the timetable of the consultations, for example. Then if you come to daycare services, there is an interesting piece of work that we have started a few years ago, which is called Turn the Page. And it's about discussing stereotypes in books and textbooks used in preschool and school years. That's very useful to sensitize the teachers and educators about the figures, the images, the letters, the whatever, the stories that kids are presented with. At the same time, we have produced last year a distance learning for educators about how to involve fathers. Right now, I think we have more than 2,000 participants that have already taken the course, which is not bad. And of course, it's still going on. But probably the area where we have had more progress is the area of work with companies. As Anina said before, particularly medium-sized and big companies are a crucial issue about the human resource management is to offer the young employers that want to become fathers and mothers elongated by state legislation. No? So I think this example is stimulating other companies. Maybe Anina will help about this, but we will probably have our next campaign for an extended and long parental leave taken together with an association of private companies, and that I think will make a difference vis-a-vis the government, because the government may not be very keen to pay attention to NGOs, but probably companies have a much greater political weight, And then just to give another example, just last week we had a presentation at the Italian Ordine of Giornalisti. The Journalist Association is giving courses and training, and so we organize a training for journalists about how to deal with this issue about fatherhood, early involvement, the benefits of early involvement, the obstacles of early involvement, so that the media may take a more favorable perspective on all this. And I could also mention the social network. Of course, today they are very important, and we try to involve also the most common social network in this work. But I cannot take more time because I've already talked too much. But just to give an example, because this is really a whole of society endeavor, and all sectors must be involved. And so I think we have to become brave enough to involve all sectors. Thank you.
Shall I?
Thank you, Giorgio. Please, Anina, if you have.
Yes. Now on the last question, wait a minute. Okay. On the last question, yes, well, on the work-life balance, yes, indeed, this partnership that we've developed, I'm very scruffy, the partnership we've developed with this big network, Valore D, which is a network that includes the gender and diversity people, that's becoming a bad word, of over 500 companies. So it's a very big, very strong, very vocal network. And we're really glad that we now have this partnership and we're going to be working together on this. I want to, though, talk about the directives, because that is mentioned. We had this conversation at the recent conference organized in Warsaw, where one of the questions was asked is, do we need EU regulations? And another question that came up is, Well, are we actually, in terms of the work-life balance directive, do we want a new directive? Do we want to revise the current directive? Because we know what the weaknesses are. The principal one is that it set a very low standard. I mean, when they set the 10 days, 2/3 of EU countries already had a longer level of leave. So it was there was a lot of negotiation, and as the negotiation went on, there were compromises to lower the standard. Also, there's this issue of there has to be adequate payment for parental leave for fathers, but adequate is not defined, and most countries have very inadequate. But the thing is, so that's something that needs to be discussed. Are we going to together fight for a new directive, bearing in mind, however, that the political climate in Europe has changed, and we all know this. So it may actually be harder, get a new directive, better work on the old one. And another thing that we also said is that regulations, I mean, EU regulations are tremendously important to have greater uniformity, greater cohesion across countries, because I think many of us dream of this sort of federal idea of Europe, where countries become more similar, not more different. So that's a very important reason to have these regulations. However, these regulations, they need to have teeth, meaning there have to be some indicators to report on progress. There has to be an obligation for countries to report, but not report at the end of the period. For the Work-Life Balance Directive, the report is due in 2007, but that means 8 years after the directive was approved. So what if we had, like for some of the international conventions, I'm thinking about CEDAW, if we had a more frequent obligation for countries to report, because that, having to compare oneself with other countries puts pressure also on the political system. And then, of course, there's the whole issue about, being better at giving warnings when there's not correct application or sanctions and so on. Regarding the Barcelona targets, well, let's remember that actually these targets now have been raised very substantially, because they're now from 33 to 45. And if we look at this from the Italian perspective, we're doing pretty badly, because some regions in central northern Italy have reached the Barcelona targets, which was the 33. Some are a little bit more, but in southern Italy, we're very, very low down. And this is actually an important investment. However, I'd like to note that all the documents talk about the value of early child education from a gender equality perspective. Frankly, this is a very limited perspective, because education for children, good education services before the age of 3 is critical for the relational, intellectual development of children. And it's a very powerful instrument to fight educational poverty, which then translates into inequalities, socioeconomic inequalities later on. So I think it's important to push for the new targets, but also bringing into the narrative this focus on children. I stop here.
I'm sorry, apologies. Somehow my mouse didn't work. Thank you so much, Georgiana and Nina, for these insights. It seems the more we talk, we see the breadth and the wealth of the work that we need to do, but it also comes as a holistic way that we need to address in a very holistic way. Before we continue, I couldn't hear from Heinrich. And then after Heinrich, I would like to give the floor to Martino to reflect a little bit, and then we will move on with Nikki and Tavishi. Yes, please, Heinrich.
Yeah, not much left to say after all these interesting contributions from Portugal and from Italy. fully agree with most of what's said, and maybe can give some examples of what has worked here in Spain. With regard to what Giorgio said about the importance of involving fathers in perinatal health, we did start an initiative to develop birth preparation courses, especially or specifically and exclusively focused on fathers. So for fathers only, in collaboration with the public sexual and reproductive health centers, initially in Barcelona. And you can find a short brief on this project in the report, which is now being extended and delivered by the Plural Center for Masculinities of the Barcelona City Council, and where we run groups with becoming fathers on these issues of fatherhood, on their concerns around pregnancy, birth, and care after birth, but also on relational issues, sexuality, etc., etc. And it has really been quite a success. When we first started to discuss the proposal with professionals from the sexual and reproductive health centers, they said, well, men are not interested, men don't come to our centers, men are not involved. But after really having needs analysis discussions with fathers in the centers and also training these professionals, really the groups started to take off and have now been upscaled and included in the standard service offer of all public sexual and reproductive health centers all over Catalonia. And they have such a success really in demand that there is a difficulty in having male professionals who are specialized in masculinities and fatherhood and engaging men, because these groups are run and facilitated by a midwife and a male professional who is specialized on these issues. So that is an interesting example of an initiative that seemed to go nowhere, according to professionals in the sexual reproductive health centers, and then really was quite a success and took off. So training in general, as also our colleagues from Portugal and Italy have mentioned, for professionals in early childhood education, in health and social services, on engaging men, on fatherhood, on corresponsibility, on masculinities as an important variable in these processes is fundamental. In our needs analysis within the MINC initiative with professionals from public kindergartens in Barcelona, more than 250 responded to a needs analysis survey. 80% said that they had never had any training on these issues, and those who had, it was very limited to just a few hours. And after the training that we have now delivered to these professionals, really interesting changes in practice have already started, from changing the environment, so images, posters, books they use in the kindergartens involving fathers more, to the information material that they use with the families, changes in communication and protocols, but also offering specific activities directed at fathers. So to promote these changes in service delivery, training is fundamental. With regard to the question on shifting the self-assessment of toward a more accurate view of caregiving balance, and Tatiana had already mentioned some issues. There are these activity trackers, even some apps now where you can track the care activities. But in our experience, some of the workshops, a rather simple but detailed list of the different care activities, and then asking fathers to say if it's always them, usually them, both parents more or less equally, usually the other parent, always the other parent, or somebody else or nobody who does these activities, does usually give quite a realistic picture, especially if it is then contrasted with what the partners, the mothers say. And a recent representative survey in Spain published by Intermon Oxfam based on this methodology has really shown that that the care gap is still quite large, especially, and it's similar to our IMINC report in cleaning, laundry, preparing food, but also childcare from 40–30% care gap there, except for the activities related to economics, where there's a slight inversion of men doing more of these activities. And one issue that really in our report didn't come out much is that you've all mentioned, and one of the big issues here of the mental load, the difference in what we tried to ask for as mental load was really low, almost inexistent between men and women. I think there's a methodological issue there that we could reflect about, and that is probably the most difficult care gap for men to appreciate. And really in workshops and groups that we run with fathers and men, using some videos with a humorous approach helps starting the discussions. But probably until men are the exclusive or sole carers, it is probably hard to really grasp what the mental load means. And that leads me to maybe the last question around the policies. We can't really complain much in comparison about our parental leave policy, but still there is a demand to increase to 20 weeks. And actually it is in the government program, but we don't have majorities now for the state budget, so it is on hold, but it should be increased to 20 weeks for both parents. But probably the more interesting demands that we share with the Spanish platform from Equal and Transferable Leave, the PEPINA, is to reduce the mandatory simultaneous part of the leave, which is now 6 weeks, to just 2 weeks. And to facilitate that fathers can take their leave after mothers have finished their leave. And that should be done by excluding or taking out the need to negotiate the 10 weeks that are fractionable with the employer, but to just inform the employer about when this leave shall be taken. And that would facilitate that men could take their leave after women have finished the leave and be then the sole carers for 10 weeks, or if it's extended, even up to 18 weeks. And that would really help to understand what the mental load means. And of course, it would be, and above all, beneficial for children who would then be cared for by a parent for at least 30 weeks and possibly up to 38 weeks if it is extended to 20 weeks. So these would be policy changes that would still further encourage men's full involvement in care and childcare in this respect. And another initiative that we can just briefly mention is the Co-Responsible program, which is a big statewide program funded and developed by the Ministry of Equality in 2023-24 with a budget of 200 million, mainly with designated at support service for families around care. But 3% of the budget had to be dedicated to activities on engaging men in care and in co-responsibility. And that has been quite transformative because all the autonomous regions and local administrations had this budget reserved to initiatives or activities, programs directed at men, and that produced quite a cultural shift also, apart from the initiatives being delivered. It brought the issue really on the table for many of these administrations. Yeah, so these are some reflections, thoughts, and examples from Spain, trying to respond to the three questions you've posed.
Thank you so much, Heinrich. Thank you. I'm checking the time. Also, just a little note: if any audience wants to ask any questions, they can use the chat function, and I'm sharing the compendium of good practices, where most of the practices that were mentioned here, you can find more in-depth information. It's also that we developed it together under MA. And I would like to give now floor to Martino to reflect overall the questions, but mostly about the care gap that you were focusing on, and more, if you would.
Yeah, but first of all, thanks a lot for the invitation. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thanks for the report. I tried to read it the last 2 nights, and it was extremely interesting, and already got asked to share it with people here in Brussels. And I don't know, for what I can contribute is I wanted to really briefly provide an input on related to the role of services, because ultimately is what we have been working on at COFACE in these past years, and the idea being shifting the self-perception of men as caregivers requires more than just policy changes, requires like a cultural shift. And leave policies, our perspective is that leave policy, not especially non-transferable leaves for fathers, create a space for intensive parenting, an initial space for caregiving, but then sustained engagement also depends on the capacity of services to reinforce this role after leave ends, or before, if we're talking about engagement in prenatal health activities. Like it is like embedding these father inclusive practices across health and crucially early childhood education and care. We can contribute to the shifting of these cultural norms and help men internalize their caregiving identity, and thinking when nurseries actively engage fathers, they reinforce the idea that caregiving is a shared responsibility. When fathers are involved in prenatal, postnatal care and feel they're treated as not as peripheral figures, they feel normalized as equal caregivers to their partners. And this is, I think, the key is ensuring that these services not merely include fathers, but like really validate their developing self-perception as primary caregivers. Now, optimistic take from us. One of the most promising, I think, opportunities or windows of opportunities to do that from our perspective as an organization, as observatory that has conducted some research of what is going on around Europe, opportunities to reshape this self-perception of men as caregivers lies, in our opinion, in this leveraging this growing trend that we observe in Europe towards multidisciplinary, cross-sectoral, integrated services catering to families in the perinatal phase. Like across Europe, we're witnessing, I think, in this relation, 2 things. One is the emergence, like ever more frequent, of multidisciplinary hubs that are designed to provide this type of like holistic, at least cross-sectoral support to families, and in particular for families with children. Whether this is in co-located settings or in the context of a formalized alliance or network of services that are active on a certain territory. The emergence of these multidisciplinary settings. The other is the hybridization, can I say, the hybridization of traditional services. This particularly, I think, of early education services, but we're increasingly seeing this tendency to early ISSA settings being asked to expand their traditional mandate to incorporate parenting support in more systematic way, to act as nodes of an holistic family support on the territory. And what is extremely interesting, what I think makes this topic relevant to the topic of fathers' identity as caregivers, is this, I think, with renewed attention to the area of family guidance, the support of parenting competence development, whether this is rooted in a decline in childhood culture, that oftentimes for adults that become parents, that's the first experience of caregiving in their life, because three-generational families, households are ever more rare. Economic crisis, I don't know, families are perceived in need of support when it comes to the caregiving practice. Parents need to be supported in their first steps as caregivers. And so we see a rethinking of caregiving within institutional structures. We have seen targeted institutional services, targeted institutions being created, dedicated to build this caregiving capacity across the families. And this is extremely interesting. We're not getting to the point in which caregiving, parenting support is an entitlement of a parent, but in some areas of Europe, we can say that we're moving in that direction, because all Finnish well-being welfare counties have one digital family center dedicated to this, to build cross-sectoral networks for perinatal support. In Emilia-Romagna, you have 42 family centers, one per district. So there are areas that are moving towards something that looks like a recognition of an entitlement to parental guidance. And this is interesting, because the opening of this space for working on caregiving opens also, by default, an opportunity to foster an engagement of fathers. Like, of course, if that is only possible, if engaging fathers, like normalizing the caregiving role of fathers, is recognized as a strategic goal worth, for example, training your staff towards. And anyway, still, I think the point of my intervention was like also to underline the need of this synergy between the leave policy framework and the services that happen afterwards or beforehand. Like foreign engagement is something that needs to be seen as a cross-sectoral goal. To conclude, just because we're at the end, we're an advocacy organization, so we talk about EU policy. I think 2027 is the review of the Work-Life Balance Directive is a pivotal opportunity, and I agree with everything Anina said. But I think is a pivotal opportunity to maximize the impact of this window opportunity. I think we need to start strategizing now. The directive's evaluation should not happen in isolation. I think we should act to make sure that it must be explicitly linked to other initiatives like the European Care Strategy. Within the European Care Strategy recommendation, there was the recommendation on the updating the Barcelona target to 2030, and that recommendation is also due for revision 2025-2026 by DG Justice. And I think these two processes, we need to act to link them somehow to make sure that the evaluation of how extended well-paid leave have been and how non-transferable leave has been created across Europe doesn't happen and detached from an evaluation of how ISSA expansion is being pursued across the 27. I'll close here because I've already spoken to 8 minutes and I want to leave space for others.
Martina, thank you so much. Really great insights, and definitely there's a lot of cross overlap with what you were suggesting, definitely. And it is something in ISSA we try to advocate for, especially for systems change and cross-sectoral ISSA services working in an interdependent way. I'm checking the time, Tavishi. My sincere apologies because Nikki had to leave early. First, if Nikki has any reflections overall, okay, then I can.
Happy to leave it to Tavishi.
Okay, I would like to hear also your reflections, Tavishi, now that Nikki's okay.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I'll keep it short. I want to make sure folks have time for question answers too. But I think there's two things that are really coming together for me. And I really appreciate sort of the details with which we've gone into this particular report and the variety of solutions and angles with which we are approaching this fundamental idea that we want men to be better caregivers. And I think I'm going to take a step back and sort of, also, and I know we're all in agreement around this, but also kind of ask us to think about our starting point a little bit, which is that we have found over and over again through Ekimundo's research, through lots of other folks who are doing fatherhood research, that men actually want to be better caregivers, more involved caregivers. And if our starting point is that, then we do understand and recognize, right? It's the structural inequalities from social norms, workplace norms, etc., policies, the ways in which healthcare, Martino, you just kind of articulated it so well, the ways in which the healthcare systems also, right, continuously create an environment where men are just not able to step into those caregiving roles in a much more equal way. So one of the things that I want to talk about is how much Nikki and I and our teams at Ekimundo are trying to think about care with a capital C, right? So it's this idea that care we have feminized and devalued it over the years. And Nikki, you were alluding to this a little bit earlier, but that it is an innate human capacity to care. It is why we as a species have continuously survived, because we can care. So we need to kind of stop gendering this idea of care and start recognizing and sort of promoting it from the very get-go, but at all levels, right? We are designed to care. The part of the research that we constantly see is that men feel like they're not competent enough to care, right? And so there's a question you had asked about what strategies, and I really think one of the things that we kind of just scratch the surface on is on men's own understanding and perceptions of their competence and their ability to care, and how much we as a society can step in to promoting and supporting that. We have this flip of it, which is women do take on the mental load of most of the care, even in households where men are doing more care work. Christina, you were alluding to this. It's the women who are doing the doctor's appointments, the birthday gift buying, the planning the groceries, even if men are actually going and buying the groceries. And so I think that there is a value in us sort of again, whether it's at health services, education services, promoting competence for care. We also cannot take away from the fact that, if you're going to not fix the gender pay gap, we're never going to have men take on their share of the paternity leave. It doesn't matter how many days you offer. And Nikki, you were talking about this. Japan offers almost a month, and men end up taking about a couple of weeks, right? If we don't fix the gender pay gap, the household cannot survive on a lower percentage of their salary. We've seen this in the Nordic countries, one of the most generous leave policies in the world, and there also men are not taking the entire leave. So yes, there's a policy level, but then there's also these kind of complicated compounding factors that play a role. And then I just want to end, I know because of the time, I just want to sort of talk about the role of their young men, older men, boys, the ways in which they're living their lives in the digital space and what that's doing to their kind of full understanding of what role they play in and the ways in which they shape their masculinity, manhood, fatherhood in the relationships that they live in, right? And so we have been exploring more and more. We did in the beginning allude to some of the right-wing extremist, movements that we're seeing, and how much this online digital world has a role to play in that, and why it's reinforcing and promoting that, and what we need to kind of actually, right, sort of start targeting in a very innovative way. The digital space is not going away. We cannot stop people from being online. So then what do we do about that? And another point, I think I'm going to stop here. I want to make sure there's time for Q&A, but it's such a rich discussion. These are just some of the points that I thought I wanted to kind of bring in, but in addition to everybody else. I feel very motivated to be a part of this particular group. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Tavisha. Yeah, this is very good. And for me, when I'm hearing all of your valuable inputs, it's I see a lot of hope and push, but at the same time, a lot of it's kind of like it's a hard work that we're in it. So because like the right-wing government's coming in, there's a lot of backlash, but at the same time, men want to care, they want to be humanized, and it's yeah, great insights. Thank you so much. I am so sorry, but I've learned that our audience cannot use the chat. Thank you, Nikki. Also, we don't know the reason yet, but we will try to solve it at the same time. Maybe set up a Mentimeter if they have questions. So, but it gives us a bit more time until we finish. If there are any other reflections, I see Christina and Anina at the same time. I suppose this.
I want to hear from Anina, so I'll be brief. But I just wanted to catch on the positivity that I'm hearing from some of my colleagues here. I want to come back to Nikki's point about the joy of caring, and come back to the point that Tavishi made about how we're designed to care, and to hear Martino's point about how we are seeing services meet families where they are and starting to feel like there might be a parenting support entitlement. And I think it's very important, because I don't think, touching again on what Tavishi said about the digital spaces, and just generally like what people are being, like the new generations are growing up with, I think it's very important to touch on that joy point. Because we're seeing the new generations coming in with life satisfaction that is worryingly low. And particularly among men, there's like this lack of purpose, this solitude, this horrible isolation that we're seeing. And frankly, like the population growth also needs to continue. So we need to like make sure that people understand that, it's not just about the burden of care, like Nikki put it. It would be nice to see a reframing of the conversation around the joy and the purpose and the meaning that we can derive from being in these roles, and to see men own that visibly. And I think that I can pick up on Tatiana's latest publication, the concept note around care. And I think that was a very great framing around making this visible, making men's care proactive and very visible for other men to feel like this is something they can own up to. And I think that's very important these days.
Definitely. Anina, I'm sorry. Nikki
Yes.
had to leave. Thank you, Nikki, for being here. And she said it's important to work at local government level as well as national and regional. She left a comment. I wanted to get it in. And please,
Anina,
Tatiana.
I will take just 5 seconds, because it's an answer. No, it's a comment to Christina. It's a very, very quick comment, Christina. I really like the positivity. It is everybody in Equimundo, you must take some really good pills, because you managed to Tavish is laughing, because you, after all these years, you managed to focus on positivity. But I think that we need to be careful, because we talk about the joy of caring when we do research on masculinities, and we keep using the word burden when we're talking about women and femininities. So we need to be careful about that, not to over. That was just that.
Yes, I wanted to say, before coming to that point about the joy of care, I wanted to point out that we have a problem with the words, because care in English has a much broader meaning than the equivalent, say, in Italian, which is cura. I'm not sure about maybe about cuidado in Portugal, because care means taking care of, which is responding to the needs, but it's also caring for, which is this whole relational, this thing that has to do with love as an attention as well. It's like minding for and minding about. In Italy, care is just caring for. So we always have to remind people that care actually has this other dimension as well. In terms of the joy of care, yes, this is something that it's truly an issue with the young people, especially the Gen Z, deciding whether to have children or not. There's a lot of concerns about the future, about the way the world is, the way the world is looking like. It's really sad. It's sad because they are looking into a future that's different from the one that was in front of us when we decided to have children. I was curious about something. Giorgio picked up a statistic that shows that there's been an increase in fertility in Spain. And the question is there a correlation between that and increased leave? Because this is a bit of a hitch when we're advocating for leave, because actually the evidence so far between increased leave and increased fertility is not really there. It's there sort of indirectly because it does somehow contribute to increased women's employment, and women's increased employment, if it's decent work, if it's stable work, has an impact on fertility. So I wonder if Heinrich, if you have anything to say on this one.
I actually didn't even know the data, but I will chase it and try to find out.
Okay, it was Giorgio who picked it up, so maybe he'll send you a message.
According to European statistics, Spain for the first time had a reverse trend in fertility, moving from a negative trend to a slightly positive trend in 2024, which looks like, at least in a temporal sequence, from the 2021 legislation that introduced a longer leave and equal leave in Spain. So you may think that there is a temporal, a causal effect, although of course there are many other variables to be taken in consideration. So
I'll try to investigate that.
Let us know what you are finding, because of course it looks like a very strong argument, if true.
I see Christina, but
actually have an inkling about what that is. I have an inkling about what's happening there in Spain. And
yes,
one thing that's different about Spain in the last
Sanchez factor.
Sorry?
The Pedro Sanchez factor.
No, I was actually going to say migration, because there's been a law that was passed 3 years ago in Spain, where a lot of Latin Americans got all of a sudden Spanish citizenship. And who is Spanish is starting to be counted differently. And these people obtained Spanish citizenship in the hundreds of thousands. And so that might have shown a demographic shift in the timeline. But it might just be due to this. So I would be curious to know exactly the timeline of the data and to know how this might factor in, if it might explain part of the story, but that sort of tell us also about, you know, the need for migrants in Europe. It's another whole discussion, but then the need for that as well in terms of demographics. Interesting though, very interesting. I would think it's very important to dig into that.
Actually, in Italy, we found that pretty soon, when migrants are in Italy, their level of fertility becomes very similar to that of Italians, because it's influenced by the structural context.
Exactly. So that tells you the fight isn't over in terms of the structural advocacy. Yeah.
Well, I'm mindful of the time, and we tried our best to collect questions, but I think we couldn't manage, but also I think we made use of the time in a good way. I would like to finish by saying huge thank you for being here with all the perspectives and all the valuable information. I can see that there's only a way forward for us, and for us to be together in this endeavor and carry this agenda forward together. I will say under EMING and many other initiatives, we will continue to work towards this goal and for a better present and better future for children and families. I'm apologizing from the audience that couldn't send their questions to us, but please feel free to send us questions afterwards. You can reach us through our websites, emails to me. Also, I can direct the questions to our experts here who's been contributing. And we will be soon sharing this recording. And also, I would like to end by sharing and publishing the report of the State of Southern European Fathers report conducted in Portugal, Spain, and Italy in collaboration with Equimundo and under EMING project. So it's a celebratory moment. The report is now live, and we'll hope to get many more milestones in this endeavor. Thank you so much for being here.